Hi everyone and welcome back to Indiana Basketball Weekly presented by Big Ten Plus. I'm Hayden Smith alongside Samantha, Condra, and Samantha. It's another week of Indiana basketball and they have now won 5 straight conference games for the first time since 2016. This team is playing like one of the hottest teams in the country and it's at the right moment.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago, a lot of people doubted that even maybe they might not make the NCAA tournament or just kind of doubted them in general. I mean, they were sitting near the bottom of the Big Ten and now they have a shot at being top 3 in the Big Ten, which is a big difference, and they definitely figured out how to turn it around.
Yeah, they were 1-4 in Big Ten conference play just merely weeks ago, and they're 5-0 since, and they've now climbed to the 5th spot in the conference. Of course, that 5 straight wins, first time since 2016. This team's on a roll, and just yesterday, they were ranked back into the top 25 for the first time in a couple weeks. They're at 21. That begs the question, is that the right place for the Hoosiers? Should they be higher? Should they be lower? And why?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the ranking. I think that they definitely deserve to be ranked. I mean, you win 5 straight games, you definitely deserve to be ranked. But I don't think you can completely take out the fact that Indiana has had a lot of bad losses. Not talking in terms of bad teams, but the way that they've lost has been really bad at times. Blew the lead at Iowa, just got destroyed by Kansas and Arizona. So it's kind of, you can't help but question which team is the real Indiana team.
Exactly. It's a tale of two teams, like you just said. I mean, sometimes Indiana's really feeling it, and other times they're taking a step back, and that's whenever they lose some of those easy games. But in one of those games that they nearly lost, that was Minnesota. And Indiana they did not have a great game, but for Hoosier fans, a win is a win. And they end up coming out with the victory. Of course, head coach Mike Woodson was out with COVID-19, and associate head coach Yasir Rosemond had to take over.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, a win is a win. And for this Indiana team, a win on the road is a huge deal with how they struggled so early on in conference play. And I don't think you can stress it too much. I mean, you mentioned Mike Woodson not being there, and there were some questionable decisions based on substitutions, especially in the second half. Malik Renew had 10 points, but only played 12 minutes and didn't put a lot of the bench in, which Indiana has needed whenever Xavier Johnson and Race Thompson haven't been playing a lot. Well, Xavier Johnson hasn't been playing at all, and Race Thompson has came back from injury, but he has not been the same.
Exactly. It's going to take some time for him to readjust and get back into the lineup. The Hoosiers just looked a little lazy on defense at times, got blew by on the dribbles a couple times, and then their offense was very stagnant. Really, the only person that could score at a consistent level was the man that everyone's talking about, Trace Jackson Davis. He had a 20-20 game, absolutely incredible, had the game winner for the Indiana Hoosiers. But a lot of Hoosier fans had questions after that game, and a lot of those questions were answered, and the Hoosiers were able to return home and dominate Ohio State behind a big performance from a freshman guard who has continued to improve through every game this season. IUS TV's very own Josh Bodie has more.
Jalen Hood-Schifino was cooking for the Hoosiers. He hit his first 5 threes and was the spark plug for the Indiana offense in the first half.
He did get off to a hot start, and we needed every bit of it because Ohio State got off to a great start. And he was basically the only guy that was putting the ball in the hole.
It was a 15-0 run to close the first half. That was the difference in the game. Indiana was flying out in transition, but it was the defense that stood out to Mike Woodson.
We came out of that timeout. I talked about getting 3 or 4 stops, and we got a lot of stops and was able to get out and make plays in the open court offensively.
Caleb Banks provided an impact off the bench and was instrumental in the run that closed the first half. The freshman hasn't gotten a lot of playing time this season and took advantage of his opportunity.
He's been very in tune to what we're doing in practice, in shoot-around, walkthroughs, and I thought it was time to give him an opportunity, and I thought he came out and played well for us. He shined tonight, and it's kind of nice to see.
I had a feeling before the game, that today was going to be the day, so I tried to make the best out of it, and I think I did well.
Indiana knocked down 10 threes and shot them at a 50% clip. The difference in the shooting, the work in the offseason.
Putting in the time. That started this summer. Guys knew that they had to improve, from the three-point line because we weren't very good last season. and everybody's put the time in, and you feel good now when the shot goes up that it's going in.
From Assembly Hall, I'm Josh Bodie, IUS TV Sports.
Thanks, Josh. And Samantha, Jalen Hood-Schifino is a guy that's just continued to improve each and every game this season. It's been very exciting to see how comfortable he's become.
Yeah, a lot of Hoosier fans had high hopes whenever he came to Indiana. And at the beginning of the season, it kind of wasn't feeling like he was as hyped up as he meant to be, but he's really turned it around. Just like Indiana's turned around their season, he's turned around his play, and he's gotten a lot more comfortable in Big Ten play, and he's definitely got a lot more comfortable leading this Indiana team on offense. And I think that might have to come with Xavier Johnson getting hurt, and he's had to step up into that role and kind of play more like a veteran player.
Yeah, and Jalen Hood-Schifino's played incredible, and especially during this run of games that they've had in the 5 straight that they've won. So diving a little deeper into those 5 games before we move on to the next 2 to come up for the Hoosiers, and probably one of the biggest weeks of their entire season thus far, what has made Indiana so successful in this run that they've had?
I think, like I mentioned, Jalen kind of stepping up in the role of Xavier Johnson. I also think that across the board, Indiana has gotten better with the next man up mentality, and they kind of started to fall apart. And a lot of Indiana teams have been injury prone in the past and have not been able to bounce back the way that this team has. And so I think that's kind of a big part of it. I also think that Indiana's gotten a little bit better at guarding the perimeter. It's something that they struggled with, especially against Penn State, who, granted, is one of the best three-point shooting teams in the Big Ten. But I think that has gone a little bit better, and it could be maybe a positive thing moving forward to this next really tough week.
The Hoosiers have definitely struggled with injuries this year, but now let's jump to one of the biggest weeks for Indiana of all season. Of course, everyone at the beginning of the year was really looking at that non-con slate, that week of games that they had where they were playing a bunch of top 25 teams. Now it looks like this week might be the biggest one. But first, before we get to the big matchup on Saturday, let's take a look at what is to come on Tuesday, today, against the Maryland Terrapins.
Yeah, Maryland is a really good team at home. They've only lost 1 game at home, and it was against a really good UCLA team. They almost beat Purdue on the road and held them to only 2 3-pointers. So this Maryland team is definitely nothing to just ignore or move past. Indiana cannot look past Maryland to just look at Purdue, and I know Mike Woodson knows that.
Yeah, the Maryland Terrapins, they are 4-2 in their past 6 games. They're definitely feeling themselves at the right time, and they're led by a transfer in Jaheim Young, who is averaging 16, 5, and 3 this year. He's been playing at an incredible level, but the matchup that everybody has circled on their calendars for this week, it's going to be that Purdue matchup. It's going to be 4 o'clock tip on ESPN, a 1 versus 21 matchup. Everyone has their sights set on this game, Samantha.
Yeah, it's a matchup everyone, both Indiana and Purdue fans, look at every year, and especially Indiana fans because they get to watch it in Assembly Hall, and everyone knows how important big game Assembly Hall is. The same thing with Mackey Arena, but this week it will be played in Bloomington, and I think a big thing to talk about is how different the teams are from whenever they played last year. And Indiana, both games were really close last year. Indiana came on top at home, Purdue came on top at Mackey Arena. But something to talk about is that Xavier Johnson had 18 points in both games against Purdue last season. And with his injury, no one knows his timeline. No one has shared his timeline. Do not know if he will be back for it. It doesn't look great. He was wearing a boot on the sideline in the last game. So that, and also Rob Finney had 20 points in that game. Jaden Ivey for Purdue also had 21. So it's definitely going to be a different game. I think Trace Jackson-Davis only had 4 points in that game. I think he's elevated his game a lot, and I think he'll improve. And I mean, Zach Edey. So I think it's going to be really big on the post play, but it could surprise me, and there could be a lot of threes raining in Assembly Hall.
The big matchup to look out for is Trace Jackson-Davis versus Zach Edey. Both players received co-Big Ten Player of the Week honors for that current week, and that's going to be the matchup that everyone's going to have their sights set on. But another one that everyone needs to have their eyes on is that battle of the freshmen. For Indiana, they've gotten to know Malik Renew and Jalen Hood-Schifino very well. But for Purdue, they got a very good guard tandem there in West Lafayette, and that is Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. Those both two have been incredible this year.
Yeah, and I think Malik Renew and Jalen Hood-Schifino had a lot of hype coming into the season, and they've lived up to it for the most part. Like, have definitely stepped up in a big way for the Hoosiers, especially with injuries, like we've mentioned multiple times. But I also think that Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith have been so good for Purdue. I think you cannot count that out. I mean, they're number one in the country. Everyone thought Purdue was going to have to rebuild, and they just reloaded. And I think that shows how good of a coach Matt Painter is and how good he is at recruiting, especially in the state of Indiana.
The last time that the Indiana Hoosiers defeated the number 1 ranked team in AP Top 25, that would have been 2013 when the Hoosiers knocked off number 1 Michigan. Indiana was ranked number 3 at the time. So it's definitely going to be one to look out for. A lot to look forward this week to come. Make sure to stay up to date with the Indiana Hoosiers by following Indiana on BTN. This is Samantha Condra. I'm Hayden Smith. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you later.